And we're live. Welcome. Today's conversation, we're talking about supply chain, but particularly government policy. So, a lot of times we think supply chain and we know that we are getting stuff from other places. We're getting it from China, we're getting it from Vietnam. So, there's a lot of codependency that's happening within the supply chain market, but how the government gets involved within this policy is important to know. And I'm sure it's really important for a lot of businesses as they need to know these things in order to function. So today's guest is George. George is our Director of Global Supply Chain Operations, and he's going to give us some of his wisdom today. Good morning, George, or good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Izzy. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for joining us and imparting some of your wisdom on us today.
I don't know if you call it that, but I'm glad to be here.
All right. So tell us, what is global supply chain? And also with global supply chain, how is the government involved in all of that?
Well, basically, global supply chain is just the supply chain of various countries and how they interconnect and intertwine for global commerce. Because of globalization, the the goods that you buy in your local whatever box store is usually manufactured somewhere else. So the supply chain is the matter of how it gets from the factory in Southeast Asia to Middle America box store and to eventually to your home. So in summation, that is the global supply chain, getting it from the manufacturer to the customer.
Okay. Yes, and we are familiar with that. We know that just about any item that we pick up in the store, it says made in somewhere other than the US. So we know that that is an important part of supply chain. Now, within that, what about the government policy and how that dictates how these businesses are operating?
Well, the government mostly acts as a regulator. So
Okay.
there are things so-called tariffs in regards to how much it costs to bring in a good. There are treaties in regards to what can be transported and how much, and that's done at the governmental level. Because let's say, for example, wheat, as we see recently in Ukraine, Ukraine is one of the major exporters of wheat. But how does that affect wheat farmers in the countries where they're importing? So government set up tariffs to sort of bring the price to a certain level so it can force local economies, governments, and um, merchants to purchase locally so it can help the local merchants. So that's how government sort of steps in and sort of create a balance between what's exported and what's imported. But as we've seen in the last few years, that's sort of been out of whack for various reasons.
For sure. Yes, and various reasons. I think a lot of people are blaming everything on the pandemic, but that's not necessarily the case. There's been many factors. And with that, I love that you brought up food because so often we think of supply chain, and especially in this global thought of being mainly products, meaning like the plastic goods and the clothes. But food is also something that's imported quite a bit as well.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, Ukraine is a major exporter of wheat, especially in the developing world. And because of what's going on there, there's fear that there's going to be food shortages, if outright starvation in some parts of Horn of Africa because they're so dependent on the wheat. America and Argentina and countries like that are a major exporter of beef. And here's something a lot of people may not know, that China is a big exporter of wood. So when COVID hit, that affected home construction. So it's all interconnected. So almost anything that's made or manufactured or grown is part of the global supply chain. Even as we saw recently, baby formula.
Yes, yeah, and Alex and I spoke on that a while back, and because it definitely impacted us with the baby formula and having that scarcity. And I believe everything should get get solved with that one soon. And we talked about too with toilet paper. A lot of people didn't note that a lot of the products for toilet paper are actually being made in other countries as well and being brought over.
And the thing that drives all that, like everything else, is cost and how much are the wages it is to produce said product. So, people want to say, okay, I want to buy American, but you have to pay Americans a certain wage. So, let's say toilet paper, and I don't know exactly where Charmin is made, but let's say it costs a worker in, say, Cambodia 50 cents an hour, but you have to pay a worker in um, middle America, let's say $20 an hour. So do you want to pay $40 for a roll of toilet paper? So it kind of balances itself out. To me, the answer is no. But then again, that's jobs that goes overseas, but no one wants to pay the cost, to keep those jobs relevant.
Exactly. Yes, because we've established a standard of how much we think things should cost. And this has been a common topic, right? If we move all the jobs back to the United States and start manufacturing our stuff here, prices are going to significantly rise. Like you mentioned, we might have like $40 a roll of toilet paper at that point. And we would have to rethink and re engineer a lot of how we do things. And our infrastructure is not ready to support
But
that.
I
So,
think there's some things is that people pay a lot for and don't think twice about it. I say the easy example is iPhones.
yes,
Uh, iPhones are, whoever thought you'd pay $1,000 or more for a phone? And the part is mostly put together in China, but the parts of, believe it or not, some of the parts are from Africa and other parts of the world. It's sort of that global supply chain to bring that iPhone, into one unit. So the costs are high, but consumers don't, they have a threshold and they don't think $1,000 is enough. So people will pay for what they want to pay for, I think.
exactly. Yes, and again, it's all about our standards and that structure that we've put in place for ourselves, thinking what we think something is worth. Um, but as we know, so if we were
But
without it, it would change.
great point, Izzy. But then again, I think until we don't have it, we don't think about it.
Yes.
Once,
When we're without it, I think our thought process would change.
I think a lot of Americans don't realize how different, how good we have it. When you go to most places in the world, they shop in a marketplace, and they go once a day or once every 2 days for food, whatever they need, and they eat for that day. Where in America, we go to a supermarket. I had a friend from Britain who came visited one time, and they said they were so shocked by a grocery store. And I said, "Come on, you got Tesco's and all that." And he said, "Yes, but you have not. We may have 2 or 3 types of orange juice. You have 30. So that's the difference there."
That is such a good point. So I had gone and stayed in Italy for a while, and there were no supermarkets, and I couldn't find deodorant anywhere. It was so bizarre because I was so used to going into a supermarket, and we've got what 100 different brands that are right there in front of us,
Yeah.
and we take it for advantage. We take advantage of it.
Yeah, and I think also we take of America has grown so used to what's called just-in-time logistics, where um, stores sort of when something is bought, a mechanism is sent back to refresh that one, but to stock up. But when there's a disruption, as we've seen, panic ensues, and now you have empty shelves. And I think Americans of this generation are not used to prolonged empty shelves.
No. Yeah, I used to work in an industry where we actually would pull all of the items to the front of the shelf. Fronting is what we called it,
Oh yeah.
just to make the shelves look full because there is a psychology of buying within that.
Yeah, and I think also, and I don't know if this is the correct term for, I would say boutique shopping like Whole Foods and Amazon. That's a whole new way to shop and to purchase and to you sort of, I think shopping has sort of evolved into, you make a list. It's just something now you can almost do it on your computer I don't know if you have an Alexa or whatnot, but they remind you of when you purchase something, and they can just replenish it for you. So that part has sort of been outsourced to AI, which is a whole different conversation.
Oh, yes, definitely. And I've been just recently playing around with that and like things I know that I'll need and reordering those. But that changes up the whole industry when we start doing that and really shifting to warehouses, which is part of what Bridgeport does is, supply chain, warehouses, logistics, and you being the director of operations for global supply chain, what kind of stuff are you really doing within this industry and how are you making an impact?
Well, I hope I'm making a positive impact, but
Yes.
that's for others to decide. I think it's a couple things. First, you have to look at trends. And you have to kind of sidestep trends and sort of look beyond the next mountain to see where things are. So I think this is an industry you have to either pivot quickly or it's like turning um, a cruise ship around. It just takes a long time to make adjustments. Things like Brexit, COVID, we didn't foresee that. We didn't foresee the UK leaving the EU. We didn't foresee Ukraine. So you have to, that's sort of the geopolitical part that I have to kind of look at, advise, and say, okay, maybe we need to have another strategy. I mean, the big elephant in the room is COVID. No one ever saw that coming. But when I saw that kind of the initial things and how China's reacting, I've informed the managing partners, okay, this is a direction I think we should take. We should look at, I think I told them that a lot of, we're not set up for that. The only part of the government that's set up for that quickly is the FEMA and the Department of Defense. So I sort of took some of those methodologies and said, okay, let's use this and approach our clients and sort of, have a solution for some of these problems that's going to come up fairly quickly.
That's awesome. Yeah, and not only for Bridgeport itself and the company, but Bridgeport also does consulting services as well. And that's a great point that when you're in operations and you're actually having to do the pivoting yourself, outsourcing and finding someone who can research these trends and start that strategy and how to pivot, how to be agile, and bring them in and help the company out as well can make a big impact.
And yes, and I think, and I'll just sort of use where you are, your neck of the woods. You're from Kentucky, and Kentucky is known for a lot of things, outside of basketball and a certain horse race. But you're one of the largest producers of bourbon in the world, and I don't think some of the ingredients may come from elsewhere. A lot of it may be mostly in Kentucky, but they may let's say a certain barley or what have you is imported from Argentina or it's imported from Ukraine. Let's say, and there's a cutoff of that. What happens? They have to find a workaround or another supplier from another country to bring in that ingredient. If they don't find it soon enough, they have to, and the cost goes up. Who do they pass that on to? They pass it on to consumers. And people have most everyone has a threshold of what they'll pay for.
Yes.
And and bourbon and whatnot is no different from anything else. If you're used to paying, I'm not a drinker, so I can't. Cool, I'm gonna just make up a call. Let's say a bottle is $35, but because of COVID, it's $75. People are gonna say, okay, I can do without bourbon now.
Yeah, well, and I think with bourbon itself, for all of us Kentucky bourbon people, I'm not a bourbon drinker, but I know a ton about it because I've lived here all my life. So it's the water. The water source has to be from here. That's what specifically makes it. But what we do really outsource is the barrels. We pay a ton of money for the barrels to put the alcohol in, and that wood, the expenses have gone up. And that can make the prices go up as well. And we can have a bottle of bourbon for $200 easily here.
Wow, I didn't know that. I learned something there. Not being a drinker. I mean, I know those barrels, but that's going down a bourbon rabbit hole, and I want to embarrass myself. Well,
Just a little tidbit.
it can be any industry. Every municipality has something or some product they're famous for, and everyone's feeling it because of inflation. But that's another discussion altogether. But supply chain touches everyone. It touches the new mother who has to deal with the price and formula. It affects the senior citizens who have medicines. They have to kind of juggle, to kind of keep the costs within their, if they have a limited or income. So it's sort of just across the board. And I think COVID has made supply chain sort of the thing of the moment, but it's always been here. In my a few years ago when I was finishing up, I went to USC for a master's in global supply chain. It's one of these things on the wall behind me, and we went to the port of Los Angeles and the port of Long Beach. That's one of the largest ports in the world, and we saw everything that came in from the Pacific. And also part of that cohort, we went to Singapore in Malaysia, and we saw that was one of the gateways where things come into this part of the world. And you just see just one little thing can disrupt all that. So it's interesting to see what something does in one part of the world can affect all of the world.
Yeah. What was it? The book, The World is Flat, I think gave us a unique view of how much we are really all interconnected in this global economy.
Oh yeah. Let me give you another example. It may be miles from what we deal with BridgePort, but just follow me on this. I don't know if anybody in your family are into sneakers.
Oh yeah, who's not?
Okay, we know Nike. Most sneakers are made in China, so they have what's called release dates. So the Jordan 3s are going to be released on August 1st. So everyone prepares for that. And what happens if there's a disruption? If a COVID shutdown of a factory in China, that has an effect of the sneaker people are either sad or they will charge you $2,000 instead of $1,000 for those sneakers that come out. So it's all intertwined. It's all intertwined.
For sure. So let's bring it back as we're wrapping this up today. So I found an article about how President Biden's supply chain plan for 2020, and they were adding additional supply chain reports. And a lot of it was Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, Agriculture, Health and Human Services, Commerce, and then also the DoD, Department of Defense. How does that relate to supply chain, and what impacts are those making?
Well, that's a lot to unpack because you almost got to go to each department.
Sure.
So I'll just do two. The Department of Transportation, they regulate transportation within the United States. So within every port, you have trains that bring out supplies, and they have routes. Who controls the routes? Who controls and that gets into a whole different thing because in America, you have Amtrak and you have the let's say like Norfolk Southern or something, the railroad. So they control who has right of way on those passageways. So that's one thing. Department of Energy, that's oil, and that's another thing. That's a major import. So they control that, electricity, that sort of thing. So they control the how it's dispersed, where it's dispersed, how much is dispersed. So what the president has done, one of the things he's done, he saw a lot of companies, ports were making money because a lot of the cargo ships were stacked in the bays or the water outside of the major ports. I think Los Angeles, it was almost as much as maybe I almost say 200 ships, but hundreds of ships were just in the water. So there's a thing called demurrage. There's a cost per day of if you're in a port or whatnot, and if those costs was going up, and someone was making the money from that. So he said he'll cut that out and fine companies who were gouging businesses, of keeping their goods out to sea and not going through the port. So the president, he issued some executive orders to kind of get rid of that. And with all the departments you mentioned, that sort of open it up so it can those goods can freely go through the American supply chain system through rail, ports, through rivers, canals. I mean, the various ways that goods come from the port of Los Angeles or the port of Savannah, Norfolk, New Orleans, to get to the factories and to the shelves in America. So that's basically what he did through executive orders.
Very nice. Thank you. Yeah, I think that that was a great explanation. It really tied a lot of that together in and things that I don't think a lot of us are aware of as well in how things are getting tied up and how the government is getting involved to help, not just to do tariffs, but to also help break up any of those bottlenecks that are occurring as well.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, we don't care about people don't care about bottlenecks and um, ports and the paperwork to get. They just want their things. They want their stuff. But that's how your product gets from overseas to down the street at the Walmart or the Ace or the Home Depot or Lowe's. There is a process, and when that process is disrupted, as we see, it can cause a disruption throughout the system because the system is so wire thin of how you get goods.
Very good. Well, thank you, George, so much for again sharing this wisdom. What advice would you give a student who is thinking about entering the field of supply chain, and how is it needed in this industry as well?
The advice I would give is get as much as you can at your institution, get as much certifications as you can, learn the industry. Um, I know most students are social media and tech savvy to begin with, but follow the industry leaders, follow the industry leaders on social media, on company websites. Match your curriculum with what's needed, not today, but maybe in 3, 4, 5 years, because you know how that goes. What's hot today is not hot tomorrow. Once upon a time, they told everybody to get an MBA. By the time you get an MBA, you're flooded with MBAs. So sort of, look at what the future. I think AI is going to be virtual reality, driverless cars. All that's going to be intertwined with um, um, supply chain. So look at those new technologies and match your curriculum accordingly, and get as many internship possibilities as possible with BridgePort.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think Bridgeport's one of the few industries that's really offering not only internships, but you and James recently have been providing problem statements to universities to help them think a little bit more intently at the future of supply chain as well.
Yes, we just finished with a class of Lean Six Sigma students at the University of Southern California, their graduate program. They did a problem statement regarding cold chain. So that was it was an enthusiastic cohort. I mean, they were really good and they were really up to date on all the latest technologies, processes, solution based work. So it was a pleasure working with them, and we can't wait to expand it to USC and other schools, which we are in the process of doing. Just can't name the schools just yet.
Awesome. Yes. Yeah, and the schools themselves can partnership with Bridgeport as well as the students can then inquire about the internships and and then we're also bringing in the agile component into the supply chain as well.
Yes, Bridgeport, as you know, or if you don't know, viewers, is a major, um, I guess, destination for agile within government, DoD, corporations, business. We teach agile in this sort of a method called teach to teacher. So we will impart the information. They will go forth to their organizations and spread the agile gospel. Our managing partner is a firm believer in agile, and we are his disciples.
Well said. Well said. It's a methodology, it's a new way of thinking, and it really can create those high performing teams, as he would say as well.
Yeah, and it's really and it's for the new workforce. It's not for the workforce of the past. It's sort of there are no square tables. There, everyone is held accountable, and it is the future. It is how um, the leaders to be are being taught in the universities, but it has to be. You still have some conversion to do in the corporations and government and other organizations as well.
Perfect. So, just in summary, Bridgeport can help you with your global supply chain needs in consultation. We can also support within the university, within internships, and also within the corporations that are ready for that agile transformation support as well.
Yes, we can, and we have locations in the Washington D.C. area where I'm located, Cleveland, Mexico, Louisville, and other countries to be named very shortly. So we are expanding globally, but we are thinking locally.
All right. Well, thank you. And for anyone that wants to check us out, it's bridgeportgroup.solutions. And we'll see you for our next live cast episode.
Thank you.